Alright, hey guys, it's Miss Frate. Today we're going to be learning a little bit about subject-verb agreement. You should be taking notes on this, and I will be checking those notes Wednesday in class. What is subject-verb agreement? It's actually really straightforward. All it means is that a verb must agree with its subject in person and in number. So if you remember from the beginning of the year, a verb is an action, and the subject is whatever is performing that action. So for example, Jane jumped high. Jane is the subject, and jumped is the verb that she's performing. Now when we need the verb to agree in person and in number, what that means is that we're going to look at the subject and we're going to decide first, is it singular or plural? Is there just one person performing it? Then it's singular. Is there more than one person? Then it's plural. In the case of Jane jumped high, Jane is just one person, so we know it's singular. And then we're going to look at whether it's in first, second, or third person. First person includes yourself, so I or we. Second person includes a direct person that you're speaking to, so you. And third person is just kind of like an outside party that's not really related to you at all. So he, she, it, or a person's name. Jane is a person's name, so it's third person, and because there's only one of her, it's singular. So the subject is in third person singular, which means that the verb must also be in third person singular. So for example, let's look at these three sample sentences. The first one is, Mrs. Locke wants all her students to succeed. Who is performing the action in the sentence? It's Mrs. Locke, and the verb that she's performing is wants. Mrs. Locke is one person, and it's not including me or you, so we know that it's third person singular. Now let's look at the second one. They swam across the lake. They is the subject because they are doing something. They're swimming, and the verb is swam. They is more than one person, so we know it's plural, but it still doesn't involve me or you, so it's third person plural. And then finally, you want me to fail. You is performing the action, so you is the subject. And the action it's performing is want. You want me to fail. Because it's talking about you personally, it's second person. And as far as we can tell, there's only one person involved, so it's second person singular. Pretty easy, right? We got this. So singular subjects take singular verbs, and plural subjects take plural verbs. Pretty obvious. There are a few special cases, one important one being the verb be. It's an irregular verb, so things kind of change around a little bit. So I am, you are, he, she, it is would be singular, and we are, you are, they are would be plural. Kind of weird. But you probably hear it enough in your everyday life that it shouldn't be that hard to memorize. So don't get confused with the way that the subjects and the verbs work. Nouns that end in S are usually plural. Windows, students, schools, they're all indicating more than one. But verbs that end in S are usually singular. So he sends, she plays, David falls. It's one person doing all of those actions, so those verbs are singular. It's kind of the opposite from nouns. Also, don't get confused by extra words. Sometimes you'll have a subject and a verb, but they'll be separated by a bunch of other words, like a non-essential phrase, in the middle. When that happens, you want to figure out what the subject is, what the verb is, and then mentally block out all the other words in between. So in the sentence, my weekend, even though it was over before I knew it, was just enough to make me happy. Well, my weekend is the subject, because it's performing the verb, and was is the verb. So we're going to just block out that entire non-essential phrase in the middle, even though it was over before I knew it. When we do that, the sentence reads, my weekend was just enough to make me happy. It's a lot easier to figure out what the right verb is if all those other words aren't getting in our way. Alright, so let's do a really quick practice. Look these over, pause the video, and then when you think you have the right answer, You can press play again and see the answers. Alright, let's check your answers. The first sentence is, if you follow politics, you are familiar with Bill Bradley. You is second person singular, so we use the second person singular verb are. The second sample, others, especially sports fans, remember his sports career. Again, you have to remember to block out those extra words. Others is plural because it ends in an S, and it's not me or you, so it's third person plural. Third sample, at Princeton University, Bradley's energy was actually focused more on studying than on playing basketball. Bradley is one person, and it's not you or me, so it's third person singular. And finally, his mother, as well as casual acquaintances, was not surprised when he received a prestigious Rhodes Scholarship to study at Oxford University. This is one of the harder ones, because if we're paying attention to the words in the commas, the non-essential phrase, that ends with an S. Casual acquaintances is plural, but we're not paying attention to that. We need to block those words out. So if we take out those words, the sentence reads, his mother was not surprised when he received a prestigious Rhodes Scholarship. His mother is singular, there's just one of her, and it's not you or me, so it's third person, which means that the verb needs to be was. Alright, now it's going to get a little bit more challenging. So now we're going to talk about collective nouns. Collective nouns are things that can either be singular or plural depending on how they're used. So for example, class is one unit. We have one class. But within that class, there are lots of people. So we kind of need to figure out how we're going to use it with the verb. A collective noun takes a singular verb when the group it names acts as a single unit. So the class is excited to be learning about writing. Everybody in the class is excited to learn about writing. So we're going to use the singular form of the verb. Nouns that are plural in form but singular in meaning take on singular verbs. That's kind of a weird rule that you don't really need to think about that hard. But basically what it means is, for example, the news. News ends in an S, but it's really singular. It's the news, just one. So even though it ends in an S, it's still going to be singular. Indefinite pronouns refer to a person, place, or thing that may or may not be specifically named. So instead of saying Jane jumped high, you can say somebody jumped high. We don't know who that somebody is, so it's indefinite. It's not a definite person. So singular indefinite pronouns take on singular verbs. If you look at the chart on the last slide, you can see a bunch of different examples of singular indefinite pronouns. So our sample sentence is, each does a great deal of work around the office. The subject is each. That's who's performing the verb. Now, do we think that it's singular or plural? If you're not sure, remember to go back to this chart. Where do we find each? Underneath the singular column. So we know that it's a singular subject. And the verb is does. So each is singular, which means that does also needs to be in the singular form. Plural indefinite pronouns take plural verbs. So our example is, both do a great job. The subject is both. That's who's performing the action. And we know, because we looked at the chart, that both is plural. So that means that the verb do also needs to be plural. Some indefinite pronouns may either be singular or plural. This includes words like all, any, more, most, none, or some. So for example, you can say some of the sugar is on the floor, which is singular, but it's also correct to say some of the marbles are on the floor, which is plural. So how do we know when to use singular or when to use plural with these indefinite pronouns? So here's the rule to use. If you can't possibly count how much there is, you use the singular. So for example, some of the sugar is on the floor, it's impossible to count how much sugar is on the floor. That's not really how sugar works. There's just like a big pile of it. So we use the singular is in that example. If you can count it, though, you use the plural. So some of the marbles are on the floor. Marbles are bigger than sugar and easier to count, so you can count how many marbles there are. Therefore, we should use the plural in this case. Compound subjects is when you have more than one subject joined by and. Usually, these are plural because there's more than one, so you need to use a plural verb. The conjunction and acts as a plus sign. Whether all the parts of the compound are all singular, all plural, or mixed in number, they add up to more than one, so you still need to use a plural verb. So for example, wind and rain exist on earth. Exist is in the plural form, because we have wind and rain, more than one thing, even though both wind and rain are currently in their singular form. Winds and rainstorms exist on earth. Even though winds and rainstorms are both plural, they're combined and we still use a plural verb there. And finally, winds and rain exist on earth. Winds is plural, but rains is singular, but together they still equal more than one, so we're still using the plural form of the verb. So there are exceptions to this rule, because of course there are, because life just can't be easy for us. The exception is when you use the word each or every before the compound subject. When you use each or every, this requires a singular verb. So, if we look at our first example, each man and woman was waving a flag. Man and woman uses and to combine two subjects, so it's a compound subject. So let's look at our first example. Each man and woman was waving a flag. Man and woman are two subjects combined with an and, which makes it a compound subject. However, it's not going to be a plural verb because each is used before this compound subject. Each man and woman. Therefore, we need to use the singular form of the verb, was. And there's another exception. Two or more singular subjects joined by or nor must have a singular verb. So for example, either Jupiter or Saturn makes a fascinating topic of study. You use the singular verb makes because we're not saying both Jupiter and Saturn, we're saying one of them. We're not sure which one, but it's one of them, so we're only using the singular verb. Two or more plural subjects joined by or nor must have a plural verb. So space probes or space shuttles provide information about space. Again, we're not saying both space probes or space shuttles, we're saying one of the two. But because those subjects are already plural, we still use the plural verb. And now it gets more confusing. If one or more singular subjects are joined to one or more plural subjects by or nor, the subject closest to the verb determines agreement. So for example, neither atmosphere nor clouds exist on Mercury. Atmosphere is singular, but clouds ends in an S, so it's plural. Because clouds is closest to the verb exists, we use the plural form. However, if we were to switch around the subjects and say neither clouds nor atmosphere exists on Mercury, now atmosphere, the singular subject, is closest to the verb. So we would change exist to exist so that it's in its singular form. Alright, so let's try this. You're going to read over these sentences and decide if you are going to need to fix it or change it and why. Pause the screen, decide what you're going to do, and then when you're ready, you can move on to the next slide and that'll give you the answers. Alright, so the first one, Mars and Jupiter are visible to the unaided eye, and combines Mars and Jupiter, making it a compound subject, more than one thing. So you need to use a plural verb. Alright, now let's go on to number 2. Every boy and girl learns about the solar system in school. We use the singular form, learns, because even though boy and girl is a compound subject, every is before it, and we know that then we need to use a singular verb. Alright, now let's look at the third sentence. Neither Marcia nor her sister is ready for the science test. That sentence is correct because two or more singular subjects, Marcia and her sister, joined by or nor, must have a singular verb. Remember, we're only talking about either Marcia or her sister, just one of them, not both. And finally, the fourth sentence. Neither Uranus nor the other two outer planets are visible without a telescope. If one or more singular subjects are joined to one or more plural subjects, so Uranus is singular and outer planets is plural, the subject closest to the verb determines agreement. So planets, which is plural, is closest to the verb are, so we know we need to use the plural verb there. Whew! Alright, so we got through all of our subject-verb agreement. It's a little confusing, so I'll take questions in class, but for now, I just want you to answer these 6 questions on your notes. You don't have to write the whole sentence down, just the verb that you'll use. I'm going to check this on Wednesday when I come around and check your notes, so please make sure that you do this. Alright, so that's it for our notes. I hope you guys learned at least something from this, and we'll go over any questions or concerns that you have on Wednesday. Bye!